Thank you. I'm still thinking of myself as a nerd who has way too much time on his hands versus someone who should get applause, but okay. For those of you who don't know some of my background, I have a father who was an amateur apologist. He dreamed that all of us would grow up one day and work the fair or the farms, get our PhDs in anthropology or archaeology, perhaps Near Eastern studies, and instead I ended up here. What else about me? Served as Elders Quorum president twice. Served as Elders Quorum instructor for 7 years, and when I finally said, I can't do this anymore, I had a whole bunch of people come up and say, but you made the lessons interesting. So that's a little bit of what you're going to get tonight. I also kind of think of myself as that guy who sits in the back corner and makes the random oddball comments in church. I have great aspirations one day to be that cantankerous old man. But the thing you notice, they never give sources. I started giving sources in Sunday school and other locations. I found that people didn't like them and didn't want them. And so I thought for a change, when I started posting to Reddit, I would post with sources. And the rest, I guess, is history. So without any further ado, we will go on to honest Mormon nuttiness. What happens when you finish the quote, apply the luck elsewhere, or use the full context. All right, so what is nutty history? The way I see it, there's three kind of general categories that everyone knows. There's the anti-side, and I define that as you make up lies to destroy the church. This is the sort of thing that, what's his name, in Kirtland, where he pulled up a bunch of frivolous lawsuits, right? They were bogus, he knew they were bogus, he was a millionaire, and he just wanted to take Joseph Smith off. On the other side, you have pro-Mormon history. This is where you tailor things and alter to make sure that it looks absolutely perfect. I think this would, the muffin story from last General Conference, where the lady had the miraculous food generation appear. I think that would fit under. It's a great faith-promoting story, but it's only got one source, and she wrote it down when she was 89, and it was from a third person who was in the room when she was dictating it to another person. But it's great in faith-promoting, so that's the pro-Mormon issue. Then there's just actually what happened. And I think that's what Gordon B. Hinckley is talking about when he says we have nothing to hide, our history is an open book. They may find what they're looking for, but the fact is the history of the church is clear and open and leads to faith and strength and virtues. Nutty history falls somewhere in between these. It's where they give half the quote in the manual and then cut it off with the ... so that you don't pay attention to the rest of it. And that's what we're going to focus on tonight. These were found while I was trying to prepare my lessons for Elders Quorum, Gospel Doctrine, and so forth. And I couldn't quite bring myself to bring it out in the church. So they're just right there on the edge, just on the other side. The first one I found, I was preparing for Brigham Young's manual. The lesson was eternal marriage. It had this great quote from Brigham Young saying that eternal marriage is this wonderful institution of God, and it was just a great quote. So I decided to look up the source of it. Being a big follower of Nibley, and his thought you should look up sources of sources. And so I did, thinking there was no harm in it to show what kind of time frame this was. And it referred itself to an earlier manual. I thought, that's kind of odd. So I looked up that manual, and in that one it cited an Ensign magazine. I was like, Brigham Young didn't live when there was an Ensign. So I looked up that source, and that of course led to another manual that was after that particular one. Something's wrong here. So then I went to Google and said, where did this quote come from? Typed into the full quote and ended up in the Journal of Discourses. Why didn't they just put the Journal of Discourses? Then I went and read the quote. Of course, he's saying eternal marriage is a wonderful principle and polygamy will never be removed from earth. It's very clear that he meant eternal marriage was polygamy, period. And if you read the whole quote, it was clear. The second one that I ran into was in Gospel Doctrine. I was to teach on Judges. And in there, the lesson manual said, and I kid you not, Deborah, a good friend. And if you don't know who Deborah is, she's a prophetess, right? Her story is, there's a general who comes to her, says, prophesy where the bad guy is going to be. She does, it's fulfilled, and they all rejoice about her prophecy. Period. That's her entire section.
in the Bible. Someone, somewhere, read that and thought, yeah, that's a little too nutty. That's going to get people off topic. They're going to start talking about can women have the priesthood. You know what we ought to do? We ought to make her a good friend and completely rewrite what that whole chapter of Judges is about. Hence, Nutty History was born. All right, you all know Saturday's Warrior, and this is, I think, the most epic Saturday's Warrior picture that it ever has been. I'm still not sure whether the girl with the hair is his sister or one of the bad girls he's not supposed to be with. Remember, that I don't think that his sister dressed like that in the film. Anyway, the hair is epic. So the thing about Saturday's Warrior is that it is actually, I would classify, anti-Mormon. The reason is it's subtle, it feels good, and it actually has incorrect doctrines. If you go onto my blog, exploringmormonism.com, I go into it in a lot more detail, actually almost second by second, about where the false doctrines are. But just to do the sum up, they have that life begins at birth, not doctrinal. No one has ever claimed that. After death, we return to the pre-existence. Julie, the sister, dies, and she shows back up and hugs Emily. That's not the way it's supposed to happen. The pre-selected love interest. I think this is the biggest one. How many of you knew someone in high school who thought that they had met their absolute one true soulmate that they knew from the pre-existence? Right? It is actually not only not doctrinal, but I have at least 6 different statements from general authorities saying that this is not true. So again, they are skewing what is true, what is part of the actual faith, in favor of pushing people in a direction. That's the definition of anti-Mormon, right? It feels good, it appeals to the sensibilities, it's widespread, shown at firesides, FHE youth activities for years. And then we have the other side, the Book of Mormon musical. And the whole premise of the Book of Mormon musical is to take what Mormons believe, the actual doctrine, and simply put it in a different context. But people will complain that it's coarse, it's uncomfortable, it points out silliness, it's uncomfortable, and therefore, that stuff, you shouldn't go see that, right? Now, I do want to point out here the quote, Brigham Young, I shit on your Congress. That's an actual quote he said to Orson Pratt in the meeting of the Quorum of the 12. It's on record. The argument went that Orson Pratt thought that there should be a Congress of the 12. There was never going to be a prophet again. This is while they're debating who's going to actually take over the church while they're in winter quarters. And Orson Pratt says it should be like a Congress. We all have a deciding vote. And maybe the head of the quorum, he'll get the deciding vote at the end. And Brigham Young's response was, I shit on your Congress. He then sent away anyone who was for Orson Pratt on missions and had to vote while they were out of the room, and hence became prophet. Okay, we're going to begin with the actual nutty history now. That was just the precursor. Dowsing rods. I'm sure you're all familiar to some extent with dowsing rods, being that this is a Reddit crowd, but we're going to go into some of the fun aspects. So, very first that we need to cover for all those at home or see this later who haven't seen it on the subreddit, the 1835 copy of the Book of Commandments, and I have a copy, says that all recovery had the power of the rod. And someone was going through that and said, that's a little bit too nutty. And they changed it to the power of Aaron. Who was it that saw this and said that's nutty? His name was Joseph Smith Jr. The guy who got the revelation. This is what gets David Whitmer so upset that he leaves the church. If you ever notice, they would talk about they all left the church, but they all never gave up their testimonies, right? With the 3 witnesses. Well, David Whitmer, he kept his testimony in the Book of Mormon to the end of his days. That bit is true. If you ever saw that film when you were a kid, where the mailman comes in and says, finally, there's some sense in you, David Whitmer. He really did keep his testimony all the way through. What he also did was reject the testimony of the Doctrine and Covenants. Many people don't know that Joseph Smith invited the 3 witnesses to sign a similar statement that they witnessed the Doctrine and Covenants, and David Whitmer walked out of it because of these changes. Joseph Smith went through and altered the Word of God without further revelation, and that's why there's no witnesses on the DNC. There's a lot more there on the Mormon Think link, and I will post the PowerPoint after we're done here so that people can go and click on links. The Fair Farms response I didn't get that in there. We'll skip it. They have a very fun response. That's all I'll say. You can go look it up on your own, but it's they have this whole thing about how dowsing really is true magic and it's good, and it was a way to prepare Joseph for when he was going to be prophet. He was moved in the middle of so many dowsing groups because it's a true principle. And they list a couple of sources of modern dowsers and things. It's lots of fun. But then they say he kind of left it alone afterwards. And so I wanted to point out some lesser known quotes. Father Smith consecrated dowsing rods in the Kirtland Temple before a treasure hunt. He also consecrated seer stones for the purpose in the temple as the patriarch. I believe he was paid for the blessing. I don't know. That kind of says he didn't leave it entirely alone. And of course, that's D. Michael Quinn. Now, one of the things people don't necessarily know about D. Michael Quinn, a lot of times you just hear either he was gay, or he's an anti-Mormon, or he was a historian who fell away from the church, and that's kind of where it gets left alone. The original source, where he got his material, he worked for Leonard Arrington, and he was told to go in and work with the notes of the 70 and the First Presidency. Excuse me. So he got unrestricted access to all of their notes from their meetings. So this came from some sort of a meeting note that's actually in a journal and then got locked away again, so the rest of us can't confirm it. But when you hear D. Michael Quinn, just think someone in the 70s wrote this. When Joseph Smith was interned and carried up to Nauvoo to the temple to be buried, they did a fake out. They had a separate coffin and they did a switcheroo. And he was buried down in the Smith family graveyard, and only the Smiths knew where he was buried. And it was one of Emma's daughters or granddaughters, I forget. I think it was a granddaughter, who had held the family secret where they were. And she got worried that the bodies were going to be washed up. And so they dug them up, verified that they were Hiram and Joseph, and then reburied them further away from the Missouri so the bodies wouldn't be destroyed. During that switcheroo, they carried the prophet and Hiram in two coffins for a limited time, and then they separated them and put them in the real coffins. The fake coffins were cut up and made into walking sticks for the 12 that were present in Nauvoo, as well as some of the others. And I'm in the process of trying to trace one of these walking sticks from someone who left the church, because I would like to at least see one before I die. I want to actually, if I could, hold in my hands a magic walking stick. They possess powers. If you put them under your pillow at night, they were supposed to heal any ailment that you had, as well as, I think they were supposed to help with dreams. I don't have the quote on here. It's this, no, that one has the quote of what the magical abilities were. And then Oliver Cowdery's rod was turned into Brigham Young's cane. This is one I was tracking for a good long while. There was one random quote by this one random guy who was in the first pioneer group and said that Brigham Young's cane was really Oliver Cowdery's dowsing rod. That's a pretty cool piece. Surely that's just made up, right? So I kept tracking it down until I found the second source, and it's Eliza R. Snow, someone she knew, was of course married to Brigham, who was able to confirm, yes, not only did he have it, but they used it often in the house to cure illness. So whenever you see this is the place and he's pointing with that stick, remember what he was really doing was something closer to this. This is the place. And that really is how it went. Arsenic and old men. So, another sentence, less well known, is that Samuel Smith was to succeed him. There was no question in Nauvoo who the next leader was to be. It was Hiram. Everyone knew that. He was the patriarch of the church, but the problem was Hiram died too. And everyone knew that the next person to lead was Samuel. Samuel was very much anti-polygamy. He had Emma's ear, and he didn't really believe Joseph was involved in it. He had not been put into the secret. Now, Hiram himself had only been put in about 6 months before their death, if I remember correctly. And I don't have my notes in front front of me. Google, where are you? But Samuel had not been informed that Joseph really was practicing polygamy, so he was all for abolishing it and stamping out the rumors and all of that. The thing is that Samuel dies 1 week after Hiram and Joseph. And Hosea Stout, the chief of police, who reports to Brigham Young, was his nursemaid. There's two men that were taking the same medicine, and one of them lives and Samuel dies. The one who lives says, well, I was dumping it out every day. I hated the taste of the stuff. And Samuel, as he's dying, declares that I've been poisoned. Was he really? I don't know. We're in nutty territory. We're not there for solid. There's a string of arsenic poisoning in Nauvoo related to the individuals who revealed polygamy. That's still coming out. I don't have enough to go into detail on that, but there's a professor up in the north who's got 6 or 7 poisonings. Brigham Young died with symptoms of arsenic poisoning. I'm sure some of you have at least seen that article. It was posted on Reddit about 6 months ago. It comes up every once in a while. Yeah, under every description of what arsenic poisoning does to a person, his death fits. And the actual decree by the coroner doesn't fit. Conspiracy theories about Wilford Woodruff and the Bohemian Club. The reason I have these on here is to get to Wilford Woodruff. They will tell you about Lorenzo Snow. They will tell you about Tiny. But the quote that doesn't happen, that doesn't fit in, is why the church was in so much blasted debt. They talk about that they moved to Utah, and yeah, that took a large amount of money. They were building the Salt Lake Temple, and that was a massive amount of debt. And to work with that debt, Wilford Woodruff decided that they were going to have to get some pretty big loans. So he goes to some bankers, and he asks if he can mortgage the membership. That's right, you guys. He's going to mortgage, including the people who are inactive that might pay tithing Sunday, as an accounts receivable. And the banks agree to this if he comes to the Bohemian Club and speaks. And so the deal was worked out. The broker and the church is put into bondage to the banks of the East. Well, Wilford Woodruff is invited to the Bohemian Club. Who here knows about the Bohemian Club? Do you also subscribe to our conspiracy? All right, they're a fun crowd. I love conspiracy theory. I've loved it for years. I always delve into to find out how people react when I explain to them about a conspiracy, because I can argue either side on any of them. I don't necessarily believe any of them, but I love watching people's reactions. It's very similar to what I do every day at work. That is, I have an executive who absolutely believes that this program is going to save the company, and I have an executive who believes this program is going to save the company, and they are absolutely the opposite, and you have to explain to both of them what the real numbers are. So I love seeing those reactions. I love seeing how it happens. The reason the Bohemian Club figures so much into conspiracy theory is that it's a place where all sorts of very wealthy individuals get together, and then once a year they go out on this retreat that has a giant statue of an owl. It's Athena, and they sacrifice Care. They burn this doll in effigy to the giant owl. George Bush, Senior and Junior were both spotted there. Many famous people you might have heard of. Richard Nixon was invited one year. You can Google this as well. He replied that it was the faggotiest thing he had ever seen in his life. Bunch of men running around naked and touching each other. I believe so it's a very awkward place to have Wilford Woodruff going out to, honestly. But these guys tie into every conspiracy you will ever read about anywhere. The Illuminati, the Masons taking over, whatever. They always come back to the Bohemian Club in some way or another. And so here we have Wilford Woodruff. He gives a speech before a crowd not unlike the ones present. Wealthy people and artist boys. That's the description of who started the Bohemian Club and who was invited ever since. He gives the speech. He thinks it goes rather well. There's a report that he was healthy at 6 p.m. the night before when he was left for the club. He comes home and promptly dies. Thought is he was probably murdered. Who takes over? Wilford Woodruff, Lorenzo Snow. Lorenzo Snow, right? Lorenzo Snow now has an obligation to meet from bankers who may have just killed his predecessor. They sent a very clear message that things had to be paid on time. And he suddenly gets an idea that he needs to be prophet right now. Before, to find out who the next prophet was took 6 months, a year, like 2 years. For Lorenzo Snow, it's a week. And the way he gets away with this is he goes to the temple, and he goes to the Holy of Holies, and he prays like mad the day that Wilfred Woodruff dies. And Christ visits him. He comes out of there and says, Christ has visited me, we need to do this. And the rest of the apostles snap in action, and after that he goes and does his famous tithing round, and the church gets out of debt. Hooray! I've been hitting the button. How many have I missed? Just one? Alright. The other interesting thing about Lorenzo Snow, and this kind of goes into the Nutty history where they don't talk about it. In seminary, I was told that one time, I love how the story starts, one time, a man asked the temple tour guide, if they were, or the temple president, changed depending on who asked it, why Lorenzo, or where the Savior stood in the Salt Lake Temple to talk to Lorenzo Snow. And the tour guide replied, Christ has stood in many locations in the Salt Lake Temple. Well, like most things, there's a kernel of truth there. And what I didn't know at the time that I found out later, the reason he asked that in the hallway to the tour guide, or to the temple president or whatever, is that Lorenzo Snow met the Savior, met Jesus, in the hallway, not in the Holy of Holies. And that stands out, of course, because if he were the presiding authority, he should have met him in the Holy of Holies. The family legend by the Lorenzo Snow, which would make it into a manual if they wanted it to go that way, because we use that sort of level of source in the manuals. The legend is that he couldn't meet, or Jesus could not appear in the Holy of Holies because there was no longer a presiding authority on the earth. It had been removed and could never be restored to power until polygamy came back. And that's Lorenzo Snow takes over as president of the church, but he no longer calls himself prophet after that point, and we start referring to him as the first presidency, the president, and so forth. Fun piece of lore again. If we had gone that route and believed that, that's the story that would be in the manual. Finish the quote. If there are any principles which have given me strength and by which I have learned to live more truly a life of usefulness, it seems to me I wish to impart this joy and strength to others. This is Elizabeth Ann Whitney. Of course, the issue is that Joseph Smith proposed to her at 17. He received a revelation directly for her, and we're cut off down here, but the links are there if you want to go explore. Basically uses his position and power to say, you have to marry me, you have to do whatever I say, so saith God, and we're there. I wonder why they didn't include that revelation for her in the manual. But of course, she was 17 at the time, and under the laws of the day and age, it was statutory rape to be a person of power and to say, you have to marry me. Those laws at the time are posted at my blog if you want to go look them up. They come from England, as well as the laws of Illinois. So you've got the laws of England apply to Fanny Alger, the Hill girl, if she really isn't Fanny Alger, I'm still out on that, the Johnson girls, and so forth. Nauvoo would be under Illinois law, and it had its own set, but under both of them, it still falls under statutory rape, so we're okay to say that. Joseph Smith raped the girl. Not as in he held her down, but as in you're not allowed to go to a 14-year-old and say, I'm the mayor, you have to come and marry me. It's that simple. Marriage under those pretexts is rape. If this court record is authentic, it is the most damning evidence in existence against Joseph Smith, unanimously on the 1826 trial. Guess what's online? It's been found. You can look at all the original signatures and everything, whole trial. The Fair Farms reply, well, but he was found not guilty. That's all fine then, right? Let's look a little bit about why unanimously thinks it's damning if he was still found not guilty. Because he basically was. The judge, if you've ever seen Miracle on 34th Street, right? He finds him guilty of being Santa Claus and finds him $1 because there's nothing on record. It's kind of the same thing that happens to Joseph Smith. yeah, we find you guilty, you kind of misled people, but it's not a big a deal, you're a kid. The fine's a couple bucks. So what did they say in that trial? Well, they said that he killed a sheep. There's about 5 or 6 individuals who bear testimony that he went and took a sheep and cut it open and...
You just skipped, sweetie.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That he killed a sheep and used its blood in a treasure-seeking ritual. They also bore testimony that he killed a black dog. This is ridiculous, right? John C. Bennett remarked that Joseph told him to kill a sheep and use its entrails as part of his repentance process when he was caught with the spiritual wives. Now that John C. Bennett, he's always making up stuff. Oh wait, hey, look at this. Joseph told him to purify a certain room in the temple. They must kill the lamb. Huh. Funny thing is, that quote happened at the same time as John C. Bennett's quote. That's right. The day that he told the 12 to kill a lamb is the same day that John C. Bennett said he was told to kill a lamb. Crazy, huh? That John C. Bennett is such a liar. Speaking of the temple plan, under the pulpit in the west end will be a place to offer sacrifices. There'll be an altar prepared for that purpose so that when any sacrifices are to be altered, they should be offered there. Pretty straightforward. We would be a blood-sacrificing people if Joseph were not killed. Brigham gets this. He quotes, you see this 1857, this is Brigham saying this should be done, and then he doesn't follow through with it. He's not the animal-killing type, so he just doesn't follow through. When we see a temple built right, there will be a place for priests to enter and put on their robes and offer up sacrifices. 1846. Everyone understood this was supposed to happen, but they let it go because Joseph was dead. Oh, the family dagger. This is a great one. If you haven't seen a picture of this, it's online, it's great. Michael Quinn found the family dagger in Hiram's possession. That's a little bit of a stretch. It was in an auction. It was taken to one of the Sunstone conferences. People were allowed to handle and see it for themselves. It was in Hiram's possessions. He says that because of the alignment, this is clearly Joseph Smith Sr.'s dagger, and it was used to make magic circles on the ground. Fair argues with that. They're like, yeah, he gets the dates wrong, he's got the time wrong, everything's wrong, but they never actually address the real thing, which is why did they have the dagger? Well, why would the family have a dagger that had symbols of Mars and astrological symbols on it? What?
Because they were Masons.
Because they were Masons, and then the Masonic dagger and Masonic reasons. Well, the thing that they do point out is that, in defending that this dagger is not Joseph's, is that Joseph did go to magic circles, that they were there, that they went treasure hunting, and that someone brought swords to draw in the dirt with. Okay, so he was really there. They omit that. That's fine. Drawing in swords, pentagrams, absolutely cool. No problem there. But it wasn't their dagger. What I suspect, and this is my own little theory, there's a Times and Seasons article that said that you had to bring your own dagger to the temple. It's a reminder for all the people. Hiram may have purchased the dagger while in Nauvoo, so he had a dagger to go to the temple with. It makes perfect sense, right? I mean, you all have your daggers to go to the things changed. The point of the dagger was that they would cut the symbols in the garments while you were wearing them. And it was male to male and female to female, so, you know, it wasn't that odd to cut breasts out of undergarments, but the point is, you would then take them home and sew them together yourself. And that is how the symbols came to be the way they are. So that may have been that Hiram wanted it for that purpose. That's the other logical reason to get a magic dagger that I can see. There could be another explanation. I'll grant you that. But whoever on Fair replies to this, please include it as much as you can about the dagger and the temple thing. Would love to hear it. Finish the quote. Plates. So Sally Chase, the link on there goes to a huge article in the inside about keeping the plates safe. And it all talks all about Sally Chase, Samuel Lawrence, Willard Chase. We're just going to finish the bits that they didn't mention. she's described as a wicked seer who attempted to take the place. The thing is, her father, Willard Chase, was part of the treasure hunting group that Joseph Smith signed an agreement would get part of anything he found. Yeah, there's a reason they were looking for those plates, because he signed an agreement. It's a little awkward. I'm sure that God had to have him... No, never mind. Joseph went to Willard to get the box he kept the plates in, promising him a portion for building the box. You know, they already had, you're going to get a fifth. Well, I'll pay you a little on top of the profits I get from these golden plates if you make me a box. This is the same box where they come into the barn and the box is smashed, and Joseph replies, oh, I hid it up in the flax. Remember that? No? Trust me, it's in there. They talk about it at length in the inside. Why did he go to the bad guys to get the box? Why did he promise him payment? It seems a little awkward. Joseph obtained the first seer stone via Sally Chase, this wicked seer. Right? He uses her green glass to see where the egg-shaped one is. He goes and finds that. Uses the egg-shaped one to find where the white stone is. I've done it again. There we are. You can edit that on YouTube, right? Dagger. All right. So he's sitting here working with just a dozen seers, half dozen. We got Samuel Lawrence is another seer. Joseph believes him to be the man that he's supposed to take to see the plates. He brings him up to the hill Cumorah, and he sees the Nephite interpreters are there with the plates, and says, Joseph, do you see nothing else with these plates? Just like, no, I don't. He says, I see something with these plates. Are you sure you see nothing? He says, yes, I see a pair of spectacles. First mention of the Nephite interpreters in this dispensation, different seer. Again, awkward bit, they never tell him the man. Todd Compton, a fair, has a book where he says Fanny Allinger occurred in 1832. Eliza R. Snow records the wedding occurring in 1836. And it's in Brian Hill's book, also fair. Notice I've used no anti-Mormon sources yet. Unless you think Mormon think is anti-Mormon, and I mentioned it once, but I had my own source being in the book of Commandments, the one the little girl saved, right? Right, okay. Joseph Smith's notes. This leads fair to conclude that she was a legitimate wife. 4 years before the wedding, no problem. Wish I could use logic like that and get away with it. Joseph Smith married one woman every 25 days during Nauvoo, with a 6-month break after Sarah Pratt. That's an amazing statistic. How many of you ever heard anything close to that while you were in... No, I'm not even going to ask for hands. That's it. 2 of them were fatherless sisters. One who testified he had sex with her in bed once, but not only sex once, on the stand. Apparently, he was okay with various locations. And she testified to that, to make sure that everyone knew he had sex with his wives. That was the goal to prove at this point. You see, there was this bothersome boy. His name was Joseph Smith III. And he said he was the right successor for the church. And Brigham Young needed to prove that no, his power base was the right succession for the church. And Joseph Smith III argued there was never any polygamy. So Brigham Young asked everyone who was a polygamous wife to sign affidavits and talk about what happened. Now, this particular testimony about where they had sex was actually part of the Reese-Smoot hearing. But you get lots and lots of this. But that doesn't stop us from coming down here saying that Fair argues that the 14-year-old Helen Mar Kimball, there was no sex involved. Once we get to 14-year-olds, all bets are off, right? It's okay to say that about married women. It's okay to say it with the 17-year-olds, but there's no evidence for this one. The only problem is that Lorenzo Snow, the one that you're studying this year, for anyone who's still an active member out there in YouTube, he married a 14-year-old when he was 56. Yeah, look in the front, there's a timeline of all the events of Lorenzo's life. This one's left off for some reason. That's a little too nutty. Why would we tell people about that? They might have questions. Yeah, he married 4 women. Only one is recorded. I have to say that's an improvement. The Brigham Young Manual doesn't even mention his first wife. Not in there. 11 were teenagers, 11 were previously married, 5 were married to the 12, but 2 didn't have to go through with it. Can you name the 2?
Heber's wife.
One's in the manual. Oh, did I hear an answer?
Heber's wife. Heber's wife.
Heber's wife, Violet Kimball. Violet Kimball did not have to marry Joseph. That would be the mother of Helen Mar Kimball. Awkward. Hi, I'd like to propose to you and your daughter. Yep. He did that. He actually proposed to both. And then when Heber broke down, that's okay, Heber, just give me the 14-year-old and everything's good. It's actually quite a bit of time between when he proposes to Violet and Heber, and Helen Mar, so, you know, it didn't go quite as cut and dry as that. I hate to misrepresent anything. Orson Hyde left in 1841 for his mission. In 1843, his wife gave birth to a baby. Joseph took her as a plural wife in 1842, which means there no one else could touchy-touchy. Another awkward moment. The baby dies as an infant, though. I'm not even sure it was a full-term birth. So you can't, there's no DNA records, we don't know where the baby's buried, etc. That won't be mentioned on the FAIR website either, though. When they say, we have done DNA research and we know that none of Joseph Smith's wives had a baby, they don't mention, and some of them we can't test for, but sure look suspicious. Long gestation periods. Zebedee Coltrane. This is one of my favorite men. I love Zebedee Coltrane. He was one of the first 7 presidents of the 70, second counselor in the Kirtland Stake, ordained a patriarch by John Taylor in 1878, died faithful in 83. This guy cannot be questioned on his faithfulness. He was on science camp. He went through all sorts of stuff. When you talk about someone who held to the end, Zebedee Coltrane is right there. Called on a mission to the DNC. He's mentioned over and over in the Ensign. And they quote him as saying the Savior appeared during a meeting 2 or 3 weeks after the organization of the origin of the School of the Prophets in Kirtland. He passed through a room without speaking, and Joseph Smith identified the holy visitor. That is Jesus, the Son of God, our elder brother. Great. What's the rest of that quote? Joseph, just before this, takes them on a walk. He goes, Sidney and Zebedee and Hiram and someone else. Cowdery and Cowdery are all gathered together. He splits off Cowdery and Coltrane, takes them by the arm, goes off into the woods. They find a nice mossy patch. They lay down, and then they say, let us pray. And all 3 prayed in turn, Joseph, Oliver, Zebedee. Brother Joseph then said, now brethren, we will see some visions. Joseph lay down on the ground on his back, stretched out his arms, and the brethren lay in them. It's nice, homely, neat. We don't mention that either. The heavens gradually opened. They saw a golden throne on a circular foundation, something like a lighthouse. And on the throne were 2 aged personages having white hair, clothed in white garments. They were the 2 most beautiful and perfect specimens of mankind he ever saw. Joseph said, they are our first parents, Adam and Eve. Adam was a large, broad-shouldered man, and Eve was a woman, was large in proportion. That's kind of 1800s for she was well endowed. Huge tracts of land. Awkward moment if I were there. And we were cut off again, but this is the origin of the Adam God theory. If you go as far back as you can, the other quotes by Zebedee Coltrane and others right here, Joseph says, that is God our Father, Adam. Brigham didn't make things up. I hate to break it to all those people like Joseph S. Smith who said that it was a mistranscription. This was not transcribed in conference. Okay. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. Someone had to say, this is nutty. We can't let that stay in the scriptures. I've got some puzzled looks. Some people don't know what this is. This is facsimile number 2 from your scriptures. This is the Egyptian god Min, turned right side up. And the Egyptian god Min is known for one particular feature, and that is an erect phallus. He was known for incestuous relationships and basically doing every other god. Yeah. Joseph Smith says that this is God on his throne, with Abraham getting the keys and tokens of power from him. This is awkward. There's no way to get around that being awkward. And it was so awkward that in some of the early editions, they actually went in and airbrushed it out. This is before they had the computer with Photoshop. Someone had to physically go in. So someone knew what this meant, knew enough to know what was going on, and decided that the best thing to do is just remove, to cast, to cut up, to remove a very important piece of the story. All right, that's what I've got prepared for today. If we do another one of these, this is what I would do for the future nuttiness. We got cross-dressing general authorities, gay patriarchs, Harold B. Lee's religion. David Whitmer, the second prophet of the Restoration, was right. That's a fun one. Bet you didn't know that he was actually Joseph Smith, David Whitmer, Brigham Young, never mind. Oh, dang it. Joseph Smith III, The English Dirty Little Secret, John W. Taylor, The Faithful Scandal, George Q. Cannon, and $250,000, J. Golden Kimball, and A Man with a Dream, Bowie Knives in the Temple, that's another one of my favorites, Razor Blades, Throats, and Temple Oaths, The King Follett Discourse, Rings and Things, and The Rocky Mountains Over a Barrel. And I forgot the hymns. I was going to bring the nutty hymns so we could all do a nutty hymn at the end for a closing song, but I will bring the nutty hymns for another go-around should we do so. Again, we are xmormon.reddit.com. If you have questions to come and find me, I'm on there. My blog is exploringmormonism.com, where I try to keep track of all this in an actual readable fashion. I don't know how you guys follow me on Reddit at all. And my book that I am working on is Mormons and Conspiracy, and there'll be more about that forthcoming. So, that's the evening. Do you have any questions? We have some time for some questions and answers, I'm told.
Have you already published any books?
I have not. I have not published any books. I never dreamed of publishing any books. One of the things the fair guys will all say is that people publish books as ex-Mormons to make money. Have you seen that at least once? Right? I have made up to this date $1.75. That's when I posted the links to Amazon, and I was asked to pull them down, so I did. I put them up for free. Someone went and bought $175 worth of books. I got 1% of that. Thank you to whoever you were. There's not a lot of money in ex-Mormonism, to be honest. I got someone who bought me a meal once. Sorry, you had another question?
Well, the comment on the comment said something about Drunk Mormon history. Is that another book that you guys are writing? Drunk Mormon history?
Drunk Mormon history. This is an embarrassing one. So, there was a wager, and the wager was completed, and it will eventually be posted. It will involve flannel boards, and that's all I'm going to say about it at this time. But it is being worked on. Any other questions?
I've always wondered how is it even possible that Joseph Smith had all these wives and no kids?
How is it possible he had all these wives and no kids? There are three really good theories on this. No, I'll take that back. There are three really bad theories on this. The first is that he was a fast mover. As you saw, one wife every 25 days with a 6-month break doesn't leave a lot of time for each wife. The second theory involves John C. Bennett, and I'm sure that many of you are familiar with this bit as well. When John C. Bennett was excommunicated, he was actually excommunicated on 2 charges. The spiritual wifery was what was brought up in the public, but what he was actually excommunicated for was first, sodomy in the ranks of the Nauvoo Legion. They thought that was too despicable to mention. The second one was abortion. He was a doctor, and Hiram Smith says very plainly he was excommunicated for abortion. Of course, John C. Bennett, Sarah Pratt both claimed that he performed abortions for Joseph. Don't know whether that's true or not. The third is that he just was a very unlucky individual when it came to all the women he married. But again, 11 of them 11 were previously married, 11 were teenagers, 19 of them testified that he had sex with them. Were they all lying? It's possible. They were trying to prove that Brigham was true and that he should be having sex with his girls. That's the third theory, is that they all lied. And if you want that, we can go to the Reorganized Community of Christ. They are more than happy to take you.
When he died, were the wives like given to everyone else and kind of dispersed among all the guys?
They did. They
Kids took those people's last names?
yes. So well, and some of them still remain hidden. But like Eliza R. Snow is the most famous case. She was remarried to Brigham. A lot of them were married to Brigham. Brigham proposed to Emma, and she turned him down flat, and that is part of that split that happens. Was that if she went west, she would have to marry Brigham. Can't say I really blame her for not doing it.
One thing that I've run across is that, like Helen Moore Kimball, many of the wives of Joseph Smith, they were outspoken feminists. And so, you know, later in their years, they pushed for women's suffrage.
Okay, so that comes from a good mix of sources. Helen Mar Kimball has a couple of sources that said that she did not enjoy it or she was not part of it. That comes from someone who heard someone who said something. So I'm not sure that that's a good solid one. She did bear testimony of it when she was in her 80s. But Sarah Pratt founded the Anti-Polygamy League of Utah. So she was definitely involved. And yes, some of the wives were.
Okay, so I'll add one more little bit about that. Is that when they were, the Congress was preparing to do the Edmund Tucker Act, what all of the people that they just lost the vote basically in Congress, right?
Right.
And so they held a mass meeting at the social hall, I think it was, and all of the women that you just go down the list, Lorenzo Snow, Emmeline D. Wells, every single one of them are suffragettes. And the one that surprised me was Helen Mar Kimball.
Yeah.
And
she was part of the group.
Like Helen Whitney at that time.
So I guess I mixed up the question. The question is about suffrage, women's suffrage in Utah. And yes, the Church of Watchmen hold up that women's suffrage happened in Utah earlier and that they had more rights and so forth. And it was very much because of the Relief Society. They were a powerful organization. What I was thought you were asking was about polygamy. And
okay, sorry.
so yeah, I got that confused. But yeah, there were many of them were part of it. The other thing they were is many of them, the head of the Relief Study, were the founding members and on the board of the hospital. So I don't know if any of you are watching Downton Abbey these days. It's big right now for those watching this 3 years in the future. The dowagers that fight over the hospital and what should be done there, Eliza R. Snow was in that role here in Utah. That was one of the things she did. Anything else before we wrap up?
Yeah, I have a question. I think before you embrace this Spalding it's like a tipping point. And I want to know, I know you embrace it here. What was the tipping point when you said, yes, I believe this thing?
With Spalding Rigdon?
Yeah. In terms of production of the movie.
All right. So Spalding Rigdon and I have a long and arduous history. I'm sorry if you're getting bored. You're stuck. So I learned about Spalding Rigdon when I was probably 9, and basically immediately dismissed there was anything to do with it. My father was reading Spalding's manuscript at the time, and he basically said, you know, people come up with the craziest stuff about the Book of Mormon, and that was kind of my whole interaction. Years later, I did a whole set of research on the Templar for a group I was in college, and had to really learn how you tell what is real and what is not real, historically speaking. And I was taking an economics of history class at the same time. And what they talked about is when the data isn't good, which is basically all of history. What you do and how you handle that, because these are non-trivial questions when it comes to economics. We studied time on the cross, which is about slavery, and how much a slave was worth in dollar value. Absolutely fascinating class, wonderful. But what they said is that you basically do 3 things. First is you have to figure out the bias. Everyone's biased in history. Right. It's one of those things that they will bring up on, oh, he is biased. Yes, that's great, thank you for telling me. Everyone's biased. The next thing you have to do is sign and measure the bias. And there's some economics tools to do that. You start saying, okay, what's the likelihood? For example, right, if Heber C. Kimball says, it broke my heart to have Violet proposed to. That's more than likely true. He's going to make Joseph look as good as he can. He's biased in favor of Joseph, right? If you have John C. Bennett, we assume that he's going to be biased against Joseph. But how biased is he against Joseph? And you try to find other sources that build up a case for how big the bias is. So having these tools, I then ran back into the Spalding-Rigdon theory. I sat down and read Spalding's manuscript. Came away from it going, that's a little odd. Now the other thing that figures in, I took a statistics class at BYU. And at that time they were running statistics on how many authors were in the Book of Mormon. Anyone familiar with the study? No? Yes? Okay. They were very proud of this. They held it up. It's proof positive the Book of Mormon has multiple authors. And I thought that was pretty cool. So I delved into the statistics because I was an economist and it was interesting and it was great fun. The thing is, I didn't really understand how they got the numbers they got. And I couldn't make it fit. And so I kind of left it alone for a while. Well, years later, I ran into Craig Criddle. If you know who he is, he ran the Jockers Criddle study on the Book of Mormon authorship. And it was at the Expo conference, gave his spiel, went on to YouTube. We exchanged a couple emails, and I said, okay, I get what you're trying to do, but I think you didn't account for lurking variables here, here, and here. And he replied back, well, it's not in the YouTube video, you idiot, because it's, he didn't actually say you idiot, but it was implied, because we had a limited time. But here's what we did in the paper, and by the way, here's the whole paper. Oh, that's really interesting. Sat down and read it, went through the numbers myself and said, wow, that's, okay. You know, it's not a testimony maker or breaker, because I'm still TBM at the time. But it's interesting. And then I sat down one day and said, this is what I would expect if this were a true theory. I would expect to find these things in history. And I drew out this big long map. And I chortled to myself and started to do research to see if any of the pieces were there. And so far, every one of them is lined up. And that was awkward. That was awkward. I didn't think that would be the predictable model that would fit. But some of the examples, things that people will say when you bring up Spalding, they'll say something like, oh, I think Spalding may have written the Book of Mormon. They're like, yeah, someone would have told, right? Turns out his family, his grandson, said that it was a family secret in the Rigdon household, that it was made up by him and everyone knew it. Okay, a little bit awkward. What about all the people who were involved, right? Well, Sidney threatens, we were going to cover that next time, threatens to slit Joseph's throat after he's tarred and feathered. Now, I want you to think about your very best friend in the world who has helped you find the one true religion, right? He has just been tarred and feathered. You have too, it's painful. I get that there's a moment of angst here. Are you going to turn around and say, I'm going to slit you and Emma's throat? It's a little hard to believe, unless you were in on a conspiracy together and you were afraid he was going to break something. The other bit, there's a couple of examples anyway, of things along the way, but time after time after time after time, everything is lined up that I wouldn't have expected to find there. I never would have expected to find Sidney threatening to kill me. I didn't believe at the time when I first read it that Sidney was as big in the church as he was. And there has been a concerted effort to remove him as an authority. If you find anything in any official manual about Sidney Rigdon, it will be DNC 77, that the succession story, right? Those are the two times you hear him mentioned. And you might get a little bit of something else when they do the salt sermon in seminary. They'll talk about, in far west, we may have caused our own problem. That's a quote from my seminary teacher. May have, yeah. That whole bit about Sidney Rigdon preaching a war of extermination before Boggs gave the order, it's a little awkward. Yeah, it's possible. Possible the other side heard something. Anyway, point is that put all that together and I came away saying, this is a better, what I would always do is compare it to the working model, right? Joseph Smith had an angel, got plates, started a church, Kirtland Temple, went west, got killed, great martyr, and all the sources they used to build that story. And and then I will take the Spalding one and line it up, and it fits the model a lot better. The other thing I will compare it to is the Book of Abraham. Sorry, I'm going way over time here. In the Book of Abraham, the apologists will say there's a lost scroll, a second manuscript that no one can find. And if only we could find that, it would prove the theory. But there's some sort of hidden coded message in the Egyptian that if you can decode it, would match the Book of Abraham, And the Spalding-Rigdon theory, there is a manuscript that we have that doesn't exactly fit, but there's a lost manuscript somewhere that if we found, it would make the whole theory work out. And if you look in the manuscript, there's little coded messages that will help you. And I look at that and go, hey, it looks just like the Farms article. So if you want to believe the Book of Abraham, you should also believe the Spalding theory, because they're built on very similar techniques and methods. And if you don't, it doesn't matter if Spalding's true or not at that point. Because Joseph screwed up anyway. So that's kind of where I fell. At this point, I've rewritten to Criddle and Jockers. Jockers is a little more terse fellow. And I brought to them the study we did in BYU for the multiple authors and said, hey, what do you think of this study? And he wrote back a very lengthy email about what he thought about that study. Apparently pages 2 through 17 of his book, or the last 17 pages, tear apart the works that were there. The BYU professor who put the study together fudged numbers. He didn't cite whole sections, and he says, I and 2 non-Mormons wrote this. I actually contacted both of those non-Mormons. Both of them said we had nothing to do with this. Awkward. That was an awkward one. Yeah, that was a really long answer to a very short question. I think we can wrap up with that. Thank you all. It's been lovely.